here with Tile and Stone Journal. I'm here speaking with Billy Valler from WB Simpson. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. Yeah, I've been. Believe it or not, I'm actually fitting a kitchen here at our office at the moment.
Fantastic, great. So I guess we should just get straight into the interview. Could you maybe, first of all, for anyone who doesn't know, give me just a quick sort of background overview on WB Simpson as a company, kind of when it started, how it got to where it is today?
Yeah, sure. Well, WB Simpson and Sons was founded in 1833 by William Butler Simpson, who then later on brought his sons into the business. Obviously, we started off we were for most of the time in central London, very near to Charing Cross, and then in St Martin's Lane at the Trafalgar Square end. We were making decorative tile panels, so hand painted decorative tile panels based mainly on 6-inch tiles that were glazed and fired. So we had, for example, in our studios at St Martin's Lane, we had teams of artists hand painting designs. William Butler Simpson was an artist himself.
Right.
And we also, back then, we also did stained glass.
Okay.
So next year is our 190th anniversary. So we're kind of embarking on or have been for most of this year, a heritage project. In doing so, we've uncovered an enormous amount of our antiquities that are installed all over the country, but especially in London. So much of our work from the Victorian times is still in place.
Wow.
And we're compiling a database of that. And we'll be having some celebrations next year. So what happened with the company is, I think what happened eventually, getting towards the turn of the century, they realised that more and more clients wanted the tiles installed. So then we started installing the decorated tile panels, and then in addition to that, there was all the other plain tiling that went with it. And over the years, the decorative painting of the tiles faded away, and we ended up supplying and fixing more and more. So I suppose by the 30s, we were pretty much a tile contracting company.
Sure.
Obviously, back then, it was very different. The tiles were very different. The fixing methods were very different, and we got photographs in the 40s and the 50s of people fixing tiles in jackets and ties and flat caps, things like that, with no safety equipment. But and then the contracting business developed from there. I mean, we also around about the 1900s. So even before that, we were doing some installations because we were tiling a lot of the tube stations.
Yeah.
So when the I think a Bakerloo line was built. So originally, when some of these tube lines were built, we were installing the tiles, supplying and fitting all the tiles in the tube stations, and then continue to do that for most of our history. And when the Jubilee line was built, we were involved in many of those stations then. We ended up moving out. We moved from central London to Wandsworth, and then out to Clapham. We were in Clapham for a very long time in 2 different premises, and then we ended up back in Wandsworth, and now we're out here in Surrey.
Fantastic.
In Red Hill. I wish we still owned the building in St Martin's Lane, but it'd probably be worth about £20 million. So anyway, there you go. Nowadays we're fixing tiles for large, tier 1, like main contractors, people like BAM and McLaren. I think BAM and McLaren are probably our biggest clients. Right. And people like Mace and Blenheim House Construction and 8 Build, and a number of large main contractors. Most of our work that we run out of here. I'm sitting in Surrey at the moment, so most of our work that runs out of here, like 95 or more percent of it is in central London, in West End, the City or Canary Wharf.
Right.
But we also have the business in Coventry, which covers the Midlands and further, and the North really, doing very similar to what we do here, but based up there, and that's headed up by the managing director there called Anthony Parrott. So
is that a separate business sort of
entity? It's a separate limited company. There's some shared ownership.
Yeah.
And myself and my business partners back then, 20 or so years ago, set the business up with Richard Freeb, who's now retired, as a WB Simpson's company. So we still, my brother and I still have ownership in the business,
right.
and some of the admin is done from here, and we're very much although we're two separate limited companies, we're very much a family together. So
sure, yeah. That's good. So on that kind of topic of the company structure and the individuals involved, could you give me an impression of the overall kind of size of WB Simpson and Sons? Sort of how many employees are we looking at? How does the breakdown of employees kind of look?
Sure. Well, if I just speak for Southern at the moment,
sure. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
That's probably the easiest way to do it. If I speak for Southern, we've got an office here in Red Hill with about 15 employees. So quantity surveyors, estimators, office management, administration, financial administration. Right. We've got a design manager, we've got contracts managers, we've got myself. So yeah, there's about that many, and not everyone's always here because some people are having meetings on site, and then we've got site managers as well. In addition to that, we have maybe 4 or 5 site managers who are running around the jobs. If it's a very big job, so if it was say £1.5 million project over a relatively short period, then we'd have one of those guys would be permanently on site as a project manager. Right. But we have a handful of site managers, and then we have our tile fixers and labourers, which can vary from depending on how busy we are and depending on the nature of the work that we're doing. But at minimum we'd have probably 20 guys, and at maximum it could be 80 guys. Wow. So it depends on we could have one massive job with, I mean, we haven't at the moment, but in the past we've had jobs where we've had more than 20 people on one project. So
okay.
And at any one time we're probably carrying out between 10 and 20 projects simultaneously.
Right. And as I understand it, you do commercial projects and domestic projects. Is that correct?
We don't do domestic, so we don't work direct for the public.
Right.
It's very rare. It does happen.
Sure.
So we're working for main contractors doing commercial, residential development, commercial development, some leisure development, and we do get involved in sort of niche projects. Like we'll get involved in art because of our heritage and because we like it. They're never big jobs commercially, but we do get involved in art projects, that kind of thing. We like to be involved in something a little bit unusual every now and then. So and we just finished one of those at Brighton Hospital, working with an artist called Kate Lee, and we're just about to start. Well, we're just dealing with at the moment an extension of a mural on the Wembley Way walkway. Wow. So and we recently did a terrazzo, a piece of terrazzo art that's now in Jermyn Street in West London. So, you know, we get involved in little niche things, but
Sure.
but mainly we're doing like a big office building
Sure.
or a hotel or a residential development of 200 flats, or you know, that kind of thing. Really.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's cool. That's interesting, because I think perhaps to a lot of our kind of readers that is a slightly different world of the kind of jobs that someone might undertake. I'd be interested to hear, what would you say with those kind of big commercial projects, what would you say are some of the kind of more specific challenges that you might find?
Well, usually they're central London from when we're managing them from down here. They're central, so logistically they can be quite difficult, you know, materials wise, because they can be up, you know, it could be a huge job up a little street in the, so that's always difficult. The time scale, the program's always difficult, because the client always wants it done within a certain period of time, tends not to get it ready on time, and then wants it all done right at the end very, very quickly. So it's the same old story, really. So, you know, they're normally big challenges, and coordinating with other trades and just general site management can be quite difficult.
Do you have any examples of any sort of notable projects, any kind of case studies that were either particularly challenging or particularly kind of successful, that you're really proud of?
Well, I mean, yeah, large projects that we're proud of. You know, we did all the tiling at Wembley Stadium. If you go up to the Club Wembley area, there's huge areas of porcelain tiling. The tiles were supplied by Domus, and we supplied and fixed all that. Must be getting on for 20 years. It must be getting on for 20 years ago now. And yeah, I mean, there's over 30,000 square meters, and that project was running late. So, and at one point we were doing about 2,000 square meters a week on that project. You know, when it went at its peak. So that one, you know, is something we're proud of. Some of the stations, like St John's Wood and Swiss Cottage, I think won Heritage Awards. So putting brand new tiling back in the Victorian style. The Olympic swimming pools, so the 250-meter pools and the diving pool, all designed by I forget.
No worries.
Dar Hardy was the architect there, and so a really unusual design, and very unusual for a competition swimming pool, using 125 mil square tiles rather than 250 by 125s.
Right.
And the tolerances. So you're trying to tile up, because we did all the wall prep as well, all the rendering. So you're trying to prep the walls up and tile them to within 2 or 3 millimeters of tolerance over 50 meters. And the tiles are not completely flat because they're extruded tiles. So, you know, dimensioning the pools is a big responsibility. So that was a fun job. That was a huge job. Financially unsuccessful for us, but it's a good feather in the cap kind of thing. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, there's many more, but there's some landmark, you know, buildings, if you
pretty significant ones.
Yeah.
Actually, you mentioned sort of the peculiar, or the kind of slightly out of the ordinary dimensions of some of the tiles on one of those jobs. I'd be interested in your opinion. Potentially, there seems to be a general trend for the format of tiles to be increasing year on year. And I was at Cheshire a couple of weeks ago speaking to a lot of the manufacturers and a lot of the suppliers, who told me that sort of the incredibly large format tiles, despite their sort of huge dimensions, are pretty much the same ease of installation for a tile fixer as the smaller ones, because they have the same weight, or they have the same kind of, they're still very flat, they're still very durable. Be interested in the take from the other side of that kind of.
Well, there's pluses and minuses. If I go back when I was fixing tiles 30 years ago, if I go back then, then a 300 by 300 millimeter tile was considered reasonably large. And when 600 by 600 started becoming popular, it seemed huge. I mean, it seemed absolutely huge. 3 tiles in a square meter. So it seemed huge. So the thing is, there are problems. As the tiles get bigger, there are problems. They may weigh the same amount per square meter. So the loading on the wall, at the same thickness, that is. So the loading on the wall surface may be the same, but they're a lot heavier to pick up. So if you take a 1200 by 1200 by 10 millimeter porcelain tile, it's pretty much impossible. Not impossible, but it's extremely difficult for one man to fix it. So it's really a 2-man lift to reach across the 1.2 meters of the wet adhesive, hold that tile out like that. Whereas with a 600, you can quite easily fix them on their own. The other problem you've got is, when they come off the lorry and you're loading them out, there's, you're carrying them individually rather than, although I suppose you're still taking one trip with a square meter, rather than a box. You've got one tile, haven't you? Or more than a square meter with one tile with a 1200. So the waste is a lot higher. So from that point of view, depending on the setting out, they tend to be, the cost of the waste is more money. So you got the economics of that. You're throwing away more, which has an environmental impact. They're not made in this country, so wherever they're made, you're shipping material that's gonna be wasted.
Sure.
Yeah. Whereas if you had a 300 by 300 tile or a 200 by 200 tile, and you might allow a 10% waste. Whereas depending on the setting out with a 1200, we've had a job recently that we're looking at the moment, where the rooms are 1.4 meters squared, with a joint cross in the middle of the room, and so they're 1.4 by 1.4, and they're specified 1200 by 1200 tiles. So you've got something like a 285% waste. So for every tile that you fix, you throw away nearly 3 tiles. Gosh. It's crazy. It's absolutely. I mean, we're going to talk them out of it and find an alternative. So it's a total waste of money. It's terribly bad for the environment. I mean, I suppose you could, if you had other rooms where you had smaller offcuts, you might be able to utilize them. But generally, it doesn't always work like that. So there's that. They're more difficult. As they get larger, it's more difficult to make sure that they're solidly bedded. And if you want to lift them up to find out if they are, then that becomes pretty difficult once they're stuck down. To lift them up and check that they're bonded. So you're using a much more flowable adhesive. Also, if you've got undulations in the subfloor with a small tile, if you take it to its extreme, like something like a mosaic, the tiniest tile imaginable. It will follow any curve on the floor. You could go around. You can almost tile a ball with it. Whereas when you get these larger tiles, any undulations in the floor, the tile will rock. It will bridge a gap or it will rock on a bump. So the subfloor that you're fixing to, the tolerances are much more important. That it's flat, so that adds another layer of difficulty. I would say, though, that from a point of view of economics and speed, probably 600 by 600 is probably the ultimate size. Or maybe 300 by 600. They're like, if you say like what would be probably the most economic and quick to fix, and as long as it's not tiny rooms, 60/60 is a good size. But these, cool.
No, that's a really interesting response. I've been interested in the sort of contractor side of that question, because you get a very sort of one-sided answer from people who are obviously producing those tiles. Well, they've developed the technology to manufacture them. And so they will make them. They will find a way to sell them. Exactly. And it seems to be the case that people, specifying jobs do want them in a lot of cases. Hence why they're being produced. But I was wondering if on on a similar line, are there any other kind of broad sea changes, like industry-specific things that you've kind of noticed over the course of your career?
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
the biggest one really, which was probably just before, on floors, it was kind of while I've been in the industry, and on walls, it was before just before I was in the industry,
Yeah.
Which is the change from traditional sand cement fixing over to using tile adhesives.
Mhm.
You know, that's the biggest, probably the biggest change our industry's gone through. Yeah. Also, less and less softer tiles and more dense tiles, so more porcelain these days.
Right.
You know, which is a very which is a ceramic tile with a very, very low water absorption rate.
Yeah.
So it, you know, because it has a very low water absorption rate, it's much more difficult to fix to. It's much more difficult to get a bond to. A bit like imagine a piece of glass, you know, or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, so because it's not absorbing any moisture from the adhesive, it makes it quite difficult to stick to. So, you know, there's much more polymer modified adhesives on the market.
Yeah.
And really, you wouldn't even be able to successfully traditionally sand cement fix porcelain because of its absorption rate. So that, you know, I think that's been a really big change.
Mm.
You know, and obviously the size of tiles. I mean, the guys on site though, we're still pretty much doing what we've always done. It's still very, very similar. I mean, some of these huge panels, like some of these like 2-meter tiles or 3-meter tiles, you need very different cutting equipment.
Yeah.
But even anything up to 1200, we're still cutting it and fixing it pretty much the way we've been doing it for the last 40 years or more.
There's a lot of kind of, I think, continuity in the skill set and the sort of the character of the kind of jobs, which makes it.
I mean, I think the variation in design and, you know, some of the beautiful products that are available now. I mean, if I go back to when I first started in the industry, which would have been in the mid-80s, you know, it was, and you looked at what was available, it was pretty boring and pretty, you know, 6 by 8 inch tiles, soft glazed, pretty like marble looking, but not at all convincing. You know, like creams and browns, and you know. So when you look at some of the beautiful designs now, especially some of the porcelain that replicates natural stone, it's you know, sometimes it can be quite indistinguishable from the real thing. Absolutely. So I suppose the variation and beauty in the material has come on massively since I started.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So another kind of topic relating, I suppose, to the passage of time and how things have changed is something I hear from a lot of people in the industry is that it's quite difficult to encourage younger people into the trade, and that's
in what way? So, do you mean in the industry as a whole, or as actual fixers, or
as fixers? Is the sort of impression that I have gotten. Now, obviously, a trainee at WB Simpsons and Sons won the Trainee Tile Fixer of the Year award at this year's TTA Awards. So I think that you guys might be in an interesting position to kind of talk on that topic. Do you agree with that assessment, that it's kind of getting harder to?
I think so. I mean, we've taken on more young apprentice up in the Midlands. We've taken on a few young people going back that are still with us, going back a dozen years or so, or more. We're in the process of taking on, looking for some one or two apprentices down here for London at the moment. But I think what we tend to find is people come into the industry. So we'll have, I think, I don't know, you know, I can't speak for up north, but in London particularly, we find that the majority, not you know, maybe 70% of our fixers are from overseas.
Right.
originally from overseas. Often being Romanian or Polish, or
Okay.
from those parts, and they would have learned quite young,
Mm-hmm.
and they a lot of them have been with us from their 30s, so not too old, and then they tend to bring younger people in, working with them, helping them.
Mm-hmm.
So as labourers and then improvers, and then they become tilers.
Sure.
And so we see that quite a lot. That, I think that's how, it seems to transition that way more and more these days, rather than, there are obviously colleges and apprenticeship schemes and things, but I think the majority of fixers are guys that are gaining experience through working with other guys, as helping them.
Sure. That's
Yeah.
an interesting perspective, I suppose. Is it's quite easy to say if you don't have X percentage or X number of young people coming through colleges or coming through apprenticeships, then the workforce is not going to be sustainable. But I suppose there are other models of kind of a self-sustaining workforce that that can arise in other ways, and that's one sort of example of that.
Yes, the majority of if you take all the commercial projects on London, in London, which is probably more than 50% of all the building work in the whole country, or probably, I don't know, but it's certainly a big lump in London.
Sure.
And you go onto any site and engage with any trade, they normally be from overseas.
Right. Yeah.
They may be living in this country for 25 years, but
sure.
Originally they're from overseas. So I suppose, as long as we're an attractive proposition in this country for people to come and live and work, then I think that will hopefully fill the gaps. They're normally they're normally quite skillful, hardworking people. From wherever, whether it be Romania, Portugal, or wherever.
I suppose just to slip this in, because I wasn't necessarily going to ask, and you don't have to have an opinion on this if you don't have an opinion or if you can't, but does any of that or anything else affect how you feel about topics like Brexit, about how kind of Britain handles itself sort of on the European stage?
I don't know, with Brexit. I mean, Brexit, we're all experts after the event with Brexit, aren't we? And I'm sure many people that voted to leave the EU, probably given a second opportunity, would have changed their mind. But I suppose it's early days. I think one of the reasons why we have so many Eastern European people in the building industry was because it was much easier for them to come into the country and work and set themselves. In fact, there was no restrictions. Yeah, and that was a good thing. We got some fantastic people here working in the industry from all over the EU. So in particular, the eastern part of the EU. But so I would say, if I was going to say, well, let's look rather than everyone seems to be very backward looking with Brexit, but if we were forward looking, say, right, how could we benefit? Then we could be employing tilers from all over the world. So, we could have people coming from America, we could have people coming from Australia, New Zealand, India, because there's probably more scope for that now, with managed immigration. Yeah. So that would be nice to see that we had people from everywhere.
Sure.
But that's down to politics, and that's for the government to manage.
Yeah.
Not for us. And obviously that's a challenge for them. But yeah, it would be nice to see, to have, much more multicultural building sites.
Sure.
As a result of Brexit, I think.
Yeah. So another kind of fairly high level structural question. There is obviously a huge amount of discourse and increasing every year about sustainability and about what people at every level of the supply and installation chain are doing to kind of improve the sustainability of jobs. And how important of an issue is that to you as a company, first of all? And then are there any particular kind of initiatives or things that you're doing that you'd want to talk about in that arena?
Well, personally, I'm into sustainability, if that's the right word. I moved over to an electric vehicle 7 years ago, and I've only had electric vehicles since. And we try and encourage that here. I say anyone who wants to buy an electric car and come to the office can charge it here for free. So we have 2 or 3 electric cars here. But more than that, that's just a little thing here. But more than that, I think in what we do, we are dictated to by the specification. Yeah. So a project will come to us, and nearly always we're being told what tiles they want. Right. Yeah. And that's where the big sustainability decisions are. So sometimes I'll go to a design meeting and they'll start talking about sustainability, and I'll say, well, you specify the tile. Do you know what country it comes from? They'll say no. And I'll say, well, have you thought about, and if it is a massive tile with a lot of waste, I'll say, well, have you thought about redesigning your setting out or choosing a different size tile in order to have less wastage, and especially if it's shipping all the way from God, who knows where, Turkey, for example, or even China. So, there's it really has to come from the designers, right. I think. We can do our bit, and we do. And I'm very keen on it on site because it affects the bottom line as well. So if I've got a tiler, if we got 200 bathrooms to do, and every time the tiler moves from one bathroom, so if every 2 days or 3 days he moves into the next bathroom and he's got a bag of adhesive and it's got 10% of adhesive in the bottom of it, and he just leaves it and starts a new one in the next room, then that's not good for the planet, and it's not good for our bottom line because we're buying a lot more. So, and the same with offcuts, when you take a cut off the side of a tile, it can only really go one way round because you have a factory edge and you have a cut edge. Yeah. So when the tiler transitions into the next space, you need to ensure that he takes all those offcuts with him that are useful, and then uses them in the next room, providing it's the same tile in the next room, obviously. So we manage that, and we manage that for sustainability, and we also manage it from a cost point of view, from a profitability point of view. It makes sense. You win both ways. So they're the kind of things that we can do.
Sure.
Transport, wastage, that kind of thing. Selection of adhesives, and some adhesives are a bit more sustainable than others. They're all pretty similar though. And then, but really, it's the choices that are made by the specifiers that have the biggest impact, I think.
Right. So. And out of interest, how much influence would you say you are able to exert? Obviously, that is a final decision made by the specifiers.
The job comes already specified. It's difficult enough to win the job, with 4 or 5 other people trying to win the job. As you get nearer, if it's people you've got a good relationship with, and you get nearer to, we get nearer to being successful winning the project, we'll start having those conversations if we think it's appropriate. We're having one at the moment with this 1,200 tile, so 2.4 meters of tile that goes in 1.4 meters of roof. So we're having those conversations saying, like, if you really thought about this, it's going to cost you, £50 a meter more than it needs to, and it's going to be a terrible waste and awfully, very unenvironmental. So we do get to influence it. Yeah,
right. That's good. So the kind of getting towards the last sort of thing I wanted to talk about is obviously the last sort of, God, depending on how far you want to go back, but say the last few years at least have seen some pretty immense challenges for all sorts of business, but perhaps particularly kind of construction when there was lockdowns. But basically, I was wondering, how do you feel like WB has sort of weathered that storm? Do you feel like it's kind of continuing to? And how sort of optimistic do you feel about the next few years? Do you think that things are going to get harder before they get better?
Sure. Well, we when COVID hit in March 2020, it was a real panic. Everyone panicked, I think. I think that they made a good decision in keeping construction industry up and running. Yeah. We were fortunate because we just about, I don't know if we just started, we're just about to start on a very large shopping centre floor, 5,000 or 6,000 square metres, plus uncoupling membrane and sundries, movement joints and things. It was a big project, in excess of £1 million worth of work, and very fast tracked. So we were doing about £250,000 worth of work on this one every month on this one project, and it was done. It was priced, and it was supposed to be done at night. So we come in when the place was shut, do a big patch. So it was a big open space done in the middle of the night, and it was ideal to do in lockdown. And it took us through that one project, a couple of £100,000 a month, took us through that, the pinch point of that really difficult COVID period in 2020, and really helped us. And funnily enough, our 2020 year and our 2021 trading year were pretty all right. I mean, not spectacular, but not bad. Sure. We came out on the right side with those years. This year, funnily enough, has been very sluggish. We've been struggling to fill our order book, especially for the second half of this year, the period that we're now in. Yeah. And next year has gone crazy. Right. So I've got more work secured for next year already than we're going to do this year.
Wow.
And some of that reaches out into 2024. And so it could be that we're a bit off our game. It could be that because, although we carried on working, I think the administration and estimating, etc. side of the business suffered during COVID. Right. So we might be paying the price for that now. And also I think that, we tend to be, when there was that big 2008, 2009 recession, we didn't get quiet for a couple of years. Because we're a finishing trade. We're kind of down the end of the food chain. So I think there's also, we're feeling some of that COVID, the problems with COVID now. Right. People who have decided, who back then decided not to go ahead with jobs, and we're now just starting to feel that now. Yeah. Jobs, and maybe that's one of the reasons why we're so busy next year, because everything got kicked. A lot of jobs got kicked further down the road. Sure. So yeah, I mean, and looking forward, I try not to, but I mean, we're gonna have a good year next year, 2023, 2024. Who knows? Right. Who knows? Hopefully, we'll all still be here the way things are going.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think people in Russia and America don't get too carried away. So,
for the most part, knowing that you have a good year next year is
as
good as a lot of people can get. Yeah. So that's positive to hear. Well, that's pretty much everything I had to kind of specifically ask you about, and I don't want to keep you too long. I'm sure you're very busy. So if there's anything else that you kind of particularly want to bring up about the state of the industry or any kind of given topic,
I think one here, with WB Simpsons, we've here Southern, I, especially me, and my business partner Mark, in the last, we've been through a bit of a few changes here in the last 4 years. Right. And quite a lot of changes really in the last 4 or 5 years, and we've been making a special effort to bring younger people into the business, and I think that people have to do that. I think that bringing young people into the business it's been very refreshing for me. Yeah. Interesting, and not just young workforce, but a very diverse young workforce.
Right.
You know, bringing more women into the business, if you're allowed to say that these days. But yeah, and it's been really refreshing, and you know, we're all, you know, it's been rejuvenating, I think, and it's having a load of young people in business, especially my son Max, who's 27. You know, he's going great guns now, carrying on. So he's you know, third generation in the business, which is fantastic.
Yeah. So, yeah. Excellent. Great. Well, I think that's a really good note to end on, sort of the continuation, the legacy. So awesome. I really appreciate you chatting to me today.